Good to have you here. It's July 14th, 2026. Every story we cover starts with someone who had a reasonable plan. In 2016, a Seattle software engineer named Marcus kept a 347-day Duolingo streak alive by completing a single 2-minute lesson at 11:47 p.m. while standing in his kitchen after a 14-hour workday. He had begun the app 2 years earlier to learn Spanish for an upcoming trip. By the time the trip was canceled, he was no longer tracking vocabulary, but simply protecting the number on the screen. The same pattern appeared in offices that adopted productivity platforms promising fun point systems, and in running clubs where Strava segments turned neighborhood routes into daily competitions measured to the meter. Game designers and behavioral researchers had spent the 2000s mapping what kept players returning to screens. Immediate feedback, visible progress, social comparison, and variable rewards all played a part. Around 2010, several practitioners, including Gabe Zicherman and Rajat Paharia of Bunchball, argued that these same loops could solve persistent engagement problems in education, corporate wellness, and personal fitness. At the time, smartphone adoption was rising quickly. Attention data showed sharp drop-offs in self-directed study and exercise routines. Laboratory work on extrinsic rewards appeared promising for short-term behavior change. The designers viewed low motivation not as a character flaw, but as a design problem that clearer goals and instant feedback could correct. Their proposals therefore emphasized voluntary adoption and measurable activity rather than coercion. Duolingo launched publicly in 2012 with experience points, levels, and daily streak counters. Strava had already introduced segment leaderboards in 2009 and grew rapidly after its mobile app in 2011. Snapchat added streaks in 2015, displaying consecutive messaging days between users. Corporate platforms such as Bunchball and later Microsoft Workplace gamification experiments followed similar patterns. Early metrics looked favorable. Duolingo reported millions of daily active users within 2 years. Strava documented large increases in logged rides and runs. Proponents pointed to these numbers as proof that game elements converted sporadic intentions into repeated action. A minority of psychologists, drawing on Edward Deci and Richard Ryan's self-determination theory from the 1970s and 1980s, cautioned that external rewards could eventually reduce internal drive. Yet those warnings remained largely outside product roadmaps at the time. Users began optimizing for the visible score rather than the underlying activity. Duolingo learners selected lessons that awarded the most experience points instead of those that addressed actual weaknesses. Some completed the same beginner exercise repeatedly to maintain streaks. Strava riders chose routes that maximized segment points, sometimes at the expense of safety or enjoyment. A subset reported training through injuries to avoid losing weekly totals. Workplace point systems produced similar distortions. Employees prioritized tasks that generated visible badges over higher value work that did not. Longitudinal studies later indicated that once the novelty of points faded, many participants experienced elevated stress tied to the fear of losing accumulated progress. The causal mechanism was straightforward. The systems measured and rewarded frequency and visibility, so behavior migrated toward what was measured. Second-order effects included reduced willingness to attempt difficult material that risked temporary score drops, and a growing sense that rest or unstructured practice was wasteful. By the late 2000s teens, mental health surveys among heavy users of streak-based apps began showing correlations with anxiety and sleep disruption, particularly among adolescents whose social standing became tied to visible Snapchat numbers. Several platforms introduced modifications once user fatigue became evident. Duolingo added streak freezes and later practice modes that de-emphasize scoring. Strava offered optional private routes and muted segment notifications for some users. A few school districts scaled back class dojo-style point systems after parent complaints about public comparison. These adjustments themselves generated new behaviors. Some users treated the freezes as additional mechanics to game rather than genuine relief valves. The broader pattern persists. Most major fitness and language apps retain core gamification layers, though product teams now speak more cautiously about sustainable engagement and intrinsic motivation. Research continues on whether lighter versions of the same mechanics can avoid the earlier treadmill effect. Incentive structures reliably steer effort toward whatever is counted and displayed, often at the expense of unmeasured dimensions such as depth or recovery. When external markers become the primary signal of success, participants tend to protect the marker even after the original goal has receded. Designers and managers therefore benefit from asking what activity would look like if the visible score disappeared tomorrow. The same logic now appears in emerging AI coaching tools and corporate wellness dashboards. The question is whether those systems will repeat the earlier pattern or incorporate safeguards that keep metrics in service of the underlying activity, rather than the reverse. We'll leave it there for today. Thanks for thinking through this one with me. If you know someone who loves a good cautionary tale, send it their way, and I'll see you tomorrow with another. And if you'd rather watch than listen, find us on YouTube at Nera Network. Links in the show notes. And before you go, this show is part of the Nera Network, a family of daily podcasts on tech, science, and markets. Each one a short, sharp briefing you can finish on the commute. If today earned its place in your feed, here's your next listen. Planetarian Daily. Daily breakthroughs in science, health, and longevity. Find every show free at neranetwork.com. Following the long arcs, story trackers on neranetwork.com follow major programs across episodes: Tesla, SpaceX, AI, space science, and more. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.